Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, waiting on attendees now. All right, welcome everyone to CrimCon. My name is Jim McCafferty. I'm a board member for CrimCon. I'm an associate professor of criminal justice at Kennesaw State University. I'm outside of Atlanta. On behalf of CrimCon, I'd like to welcome you to the Friday stream number 4, 1 p.m. panel, body-worn cameras. This is one of 2 panels that we'll be doing consecutively on this stream. We have 3 presentations that I'll let the presenters introduce themselves. But if you are in the audience and you would like to ask any of our panelists questions, at the bottom of your screen is a Q&A logo. Please click on that logo, type your question in there, and I'll start filtering questions as we move through this session. But without further ado, I'd like to welcome our first panel up to present.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marthinus Koen. I'm from SUNY Oswego. And today I'll be presenting a paper that's currently under review with my colleague, Janne Gaub. So the purpose of this paper was to apply diffusions of innovations theory, which pretty much looks at the diffusion of innovations either on a micro or a macro scale, considering actors, the environment, and the innovation. So today we decided to look at a micro scale just regarding how people viewed the innovation at 2 police agencies in the United States. And we specifically focused on specialty units. So we conducted our research at 2 agencies that go by the pseudonyms of Sunnyvale and Pennybridge, one being a small agency and the other one being mid-sized. 2 things to know is that Sunnyvale used a head-mounted camera with a third-party server, meaning someone else dealt with the storage of their footage, while Pennybridge dealt with a body-mounted camera, but had an on-premises server, meaning that they dealt with their own storage. Our data consists of semi-structured interviews, 39 of them. We had these were officers who were assigned to some sort of special unit, who had some sort of interaction with body-worn cameras, whether it was their job to review footage or whether it was their job to wear the cameras, or both. And so here you can see the breakdown of these units at each agency, and it makes sense, right? The smaller agency has fewer and the larger agency has more. But what's typical of both mid-size and small agencies is that you have some officers who share more than just one special assignment. And so it's broken down here on this table. So the way that, according to diffusion of innovations theory, the way that people think about a technology can involve either the consequences of that technology and the cost/benefits. And so that's how we are framing this, this presentation today. So at both agencies, when the technology was implemented, they saw the technology as a potential gotcha mechanism, meaning that they thought this technology could be used to get us in trouble for minor policy infractions. However, at Sunnyvale, the officers were able to see it as a dual purpose, meaning that it also helped them protect themselves from, from frivolous complaints. And additionally, at Sunnyvale and at Pennybridge, but again, more so at Sunnyvale, they saw a lot of evidentiary value in the cameras, meaning that body camera footage offered a lot of really good context. So when they're going into court and they have the video with the reports, it really offers great context for how, for what actually transpired. Both officers of both agencies mentioned officer safety, but what was interesting was that at Sunnyvale, officers felt that body cameras were a safety enhancing tool, meaning that during a high intensity situation, if you had the video that's capturing all the details you need to write in a report later, then you don't have to worry about remembering anything. All you have to worry about is the situation at hand. While officers at Pennybridge did not think it was a safety, they thought it was a safety hazard. First of all, the camera that they had a little red light on it. So if you're in SWAT and you're at night and it's nighttime and you want to approach a house, the red light might give away your position, right? Additionally, they didn't like the fact that the activation button would sometimes get stuck, and they felt that this sometimes, that extra split second that you used would be the difference between life and death. Moreover, there was also this issue with officers second guessing themselves. And one quote that we heard a lot was officers saying, people are more afraid of ending up on YouTube than the morgue. So officers were second guessing themselves in those high intensity situations. Again, another way that people can think about a technology is to consider, how do the costs weigh against the benefits? And so at what we saw at Sunnyvale, the officers saw a lot of additional benefit in the technology, and they ended up using the technology beyond what policy mandated, right? They felt, especially investigators, they felt body camera footage offered great opportunity to follow up on leads and hunches. The SWAT unit would actually take point of view footage. They would go walk through areas in the jurisdiction that they thought would be a great place for a mass shooting or maybe a bank robbery. And then they would view that point of view. So they'd walk around this building, right? All the little different hallways and rooms. And so they would view and begin to memorize that footage so that if something bad were to happen, they would have an additional advantage, right? So they use it for training, they use it for investigations and self-training. This was not the case at Pennybridge. They hardly used the technology outside of policy mandates. And this pretty much boiled down to the fact that officers did not like the technical aspects of the technology. They thought it wasn't durable. The battery life died too quickly. Even though it was easy to use, it was just, they just didn't want to use the technology. Also on the back end, it was difficult for them to manage the background software. And so with that being said, they did not want to use the technology beyond what policy mandated. I'll give it over to Janne now.
So bringing it back to the diffusion of innovation paradigm, diffusion of innovations explains that innovations have both consequences and costs, as Martin noted. Consequences are perhaps counterintuitively positive, whereas costs are negative, and it creates this cost-benefit analysis. So in our situation, body-worn cameras are the innovation and police are the innovators. But there has been very little scholarly attention paid to the use of body-worn cameras, our innovation, among specialty units as innovators. So in terms of positive consequences, we generally see some similarities between the perceptions of specialty units and their officers and their counterpart officers in patrol. So we see, evidentiary value, the ability of body-worn cameras to protect from frivolous complaints, and the use of the benefits in officer safety. These are things that we also hear from patrol officers as well. And we see a good deal of agreement between our two agencies with regard to the consequences of body cameras, but we see far less agreement between our agencies related to those costs that Martin mentioned. The disagreement primarily focuses here on the degree of openness and willingness to innovate beyond policy mandates, as Martin noted, particularly in relation to investigations and training. So while Sunnyvale officers used body cameras in ways that exceeded or broadened official use of the technology, Pennybridge officers felt that the technical limitations of their chosen camera model was so inhibiting that they refused to go beyond the official mandate for their use. So in other words, the technical capabilities of the two different camera vendors and models, which were in many respects actually diametrically opposite one another, shaped the officers' perceptions about body cameras and especially their utility in policing more generally. So only a couple of studies have looked at body-worn cameras through the lens of diffusion of innovations. And those that have done so have focused on the innovators or the environment. We, however, focus on the innovation itself and how the camera, and particularly the specific camera that is chosen, can affect overall acceptance and buy-in. As we consider body cameras through this theoretical lens, there are several policy implications in relation to the innovation itself. So the innovation component of diffusion of innovations. While body cameras are typically rolled out, at least initially, to patrol divisions, it is important for agencies to remember that body cameras will typically eventually be worn by sworn personnel wearing many hats. This includes specialty units. So agencies should consider their insight and include it in policy. In fact, permit latitude within the policy to allow for innovators to truly innovate. This will aid in the diffusion and acceptance of the innovation overall. This is especially true for teams or units with unique needs, such as investigators or canine handlers. Additionally, agencies need to consider all aspects of the innovation before committing. The perceptions of specialty unit officers in our two agencies demonstrate that agencies focus on the tangible, direct costs when making decisions, whereas officers focus on the intangible or indirect costs, like their time. And both types of costs are important. And you see here our contact information should you want more information about our project. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much. I think Brooke is giving the next presentation. I think you're on mute. There you go.
Perfect. So let me go ahead and share my screen. That would be PowerPoint slide. Okay, I'm going to start my timer so I know. Okay. My name is Brooke Mathna and I'm from Longwood University. My co-author is Marthinus Koen from SUNY Oswego. He's in the audience. He'll help me field questions. So let's get this presentation going. So we're focusing on internal accountability at one police agency. Since the shooting deaths of several unarmed Black men at the hands of police officers, body-worn cameras, or body cameras, have become practically synonymous with police accountability. Our original purpose when we collected data was to find how body cameras had changed certain practices and structures. What we found was that body cameras had changed certain structures more than others, and the majority of change was tied to accountability. Therefore, the purpose of this presentation is to discuss how the implementation of body cameras changed how police officers were held accountable for their conduct and quality of work at one police organization. We will refer to the police agency where we conducted our research by a pseudonym, Sunnyvale. It was a small city-level police agency in the mid-Atlantic United States, serving mostly suburban population, had less than 100 officers, about 40 were in patrol, 26 were equipped with body cameras. One of the most important aspects of the implementation of body cameras within the context of this study was how access to footage on Evidencecom was granted to different officers. So Evidence.com is a third-party cloud server service. It was where the department stored body camera footage. At the time, Evidence.com offered two types of access, user and admin. User access to footage only allowed officers to look at the footage that was shot by his or her own camera. Admin access allowed officers to view anyone's footage. And it is very important to note that during the period of our study, supervisors only had user access. This did change right at the end of our study. But that's what was going on during our study. And then admin access was given to training administrators and command staff. So at the time of data collection, there were 26 patrol officers that were equipped with body cameras. 23 of them were able to participate in this study. So with those 23, we conducted semi-structured interviews and then gave them a survey after the interview. Out of those 23 officers, 19 of them allowed us to join them for observations. We also conducted semi-structured interviews with line level supervisors, sergeants, detectives, training staff, administrators, command staff, and the chief twice, I believe. Additionally, we observed an in-service officer survival training session and a DUI checkpoint. On average, interviews lasted 40 minutes, and then observations on average lasted 135 minutes. So what did we find? What's the takeaway from all of this? As for training, the management at the organization said that one of the primary reasons for implementing body cameras was to help with field and in-service training. While we thought that they might use body camera footage during field training, to help provide constructive feedback to trainees, this actually rarely happened and mostly served as a means to settle disputes between the trainer and trainee. It seemed body cameras were primarily used to record how officers performed during training sessions, which then helped management's case when officers were being terminated or demoted. As for reporting, all officers said that they used body camera footage when they wrote their reports. However, a vast majority of them said that they had not significantly changed the way they wrote their reports. Body camera footage basically helped them remember and include certain details about encounters. And it is important to note that the department they did not have implemented specific protocols about how or when patrol officers should use body cam footage. So officers basically used it. They said, look, we are using it for specific reports, not every type of reports. They used it for types of cases that would go to court or be reviewed by superiors. So officers tended to use body camera footage for their reports when their report would be compared to the footage by courts, supervisors, other parties. Body cameras impacted the decision-making of at least some patrol officers. About half of police officers felt that their discretion was more limited when it came to smaller petty crimes or crimes that would typically result in citations. Some officers felt that it had made them more legalistic, either to avoid or withstand scrutiny. Some stopped giving warnings and wrote more tickets because they feared that if they were the officer with the least amount of arrests or tickets, that it would give supervisors a reason to review their footage. Other officers said that body cameras had made it more likely that they would second guess their decisions on the streets, such as when officers had to make split-second decisions about how much force should be used on a resisting or non-compliant citizen. While not all officers' discretion seemed to be affected, those who said they had less discretionary power blamed the possibility that their actions and decisions could be reviewed by others. As for interacting with citizens, we found that only about half of patrol officers changed how they behaved towards citizens, which mainly related to how they communicated with citizens. These officers sometimes used verbal caution, like limiting profanity, being careful of how they conveyed information, watching their tone of voice, using case law instead of force to diffuse situations. Although our research was not specifically focused on outcomes, we were curious whether the body cameras resulted in a drop in citizen complaints against officers. And yes, we noticed there was a drop in official complaints. And this is consistent with the research that is out there. So first line supervision. This is one area where we might anticipate changes since body-worn cameras make it possible for supervisors to be present during every one of an individual officer's street-level encounters. Body cameras also allow command staff to more readily monitor and evaluate their subordinates. However, we found that first-line supervision and general supervision had hardly changed. First-line supervisors or members of the command staff rarely reviewed footage. If footage was reviewed, it was most likely in response to a citizen complaint or a concern that was expressed by another officer. Proactive review of footage was delegated to the command staff in the training administration and occurred infrequently. It was informal. It only focused on safety and training instead of close scrutiny of officer performance and compliance with department policies. Last, Let's discuss accountability. Our findings suggest that the implementation of body cameras has contributed to patrol officers feeling more accountable for their behavior. We found that body cameras change certain aspects of the organization more than others. That is, a mere presence of body cameras or the possibility of having their performance recorded and reviewed by people made officers feel more accountable for their actions, whether it was report writing or interacting with citizens. At the same time, body cameras had little impact on the intensity with which officers experienced accountability, since their actions were rarely reviewed and their performance rarely assessed by first-line supervisors and command staff, who were very careful not to use body camera footage as a gotcha mechanism. They were aware of that. They tried not to do that. Body cameras, body-worn cameras, they have the potential to really change an organization, especially in how officers are held accountable for their conduct and performance on the street. Using camera footage for these purposes would take a tremendous amount of time, resources, money, and this would likely undermine the trust on which productive social relationships are based. This would have been much more disruptive to how the organization functioned than how body-worn cameras were actually implemented at Sunnyvale. And there is our contact information. Thank you so much for your time, everyone.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. You've unshared your screen. That's great. Brigitte, if you'd like to share your screen. Before you get started, I just want to remind the audience that there is the Q&A box. We already have a couple of questions lined up for the first two presentations. If you have any questions, we're going to handle them at the very end. So, Brigitte,
you see my screen?
I can see your screen. The rest of the
Good.
time is yours.
Okay, thank you. Hi, my name is Brigitte Poirier, and I'm a PhD candidate in criminology at the University of Montreal. I'm glad to be here with you today. So this afternoon, I will talk to you about the impacts of body-worn cameras on court proceedings. As it has been mentioned in the two previous presentations, body cams have become increasingly common in law enforcement agencies, and it is expected that this technology will improve officers and civilians' behaviors, mostly through a deterrent effect, but also it is expected that the cameras will provide better evidence for legal proceedings. Now, most prior studies focused on officers and civilians' behaviors. There have also been systematic reviews on the subject, but the evidentiary value of body cameras, however, remains largely understudied despite the expected benefits in regards of court proceedings. So it is in this context that the aim of the study was to evaluate the impact of body-worn cameras on guilty pleas and on case processing time in Montreal, Canada. Two hypotheses were examined. First, that because of their evidentiary value, body-worn cameras should increase guilty pleas, and also second, that it should decrease case processing time. This study examined cases from two courts where body cam footage was used during a 12-month pilot. So a provincial court and a municipal court. For clarifications, both courts hear criminal cases, but the municipal court hears less severe cases. So those are summary offenses. For both courts, several categories of offenses were studied, but they were all sent to the prosecutor office by the police organization. They all went through the same legal process. So for this study, there was a total of about 600 charges from the provincial court, and about 200 of those were in the camera group, which means that there was footage available as evidence for those specific cases. About 700 charges were studied from the municipal court with 885 offenses in the camera group. So what we were looking at were guilty pleas, which was a yes or no dichotomic variable, and case processing time, which is the number of days between the moment where charges were pressed and a moment where a verdict or a plea was filed. We also controlled for the number of charges in the same case, violent offenses, age of defendant, which are variables that could have an impact on both guilty pleas and case processing time. Also, logistic and multiple regression analysis was used, and I will quickly show you the results. So logistic regression analysis was conducted to predict guilty pleas for both courts. The results indicate that there was no impact for either court, which means that the body camera footage did not increase the likelihood of defendants pleading guilty. Now, as you can see on the left, for the percentage of guilty pleas, there was a slight but not significant difference between the camera and the control group for both courts. Multiple regression analysis was conducted to predict court processing time. So for both courts, the body cameras were associated with shorter processing time. As you can see on the left, on average and for both courts, it took almost 60 less days for cases to be processed when there was a video. Now, I showed you the results really quickly. How do we explain these results? How can we explain that cases seems to be settled faster, but that there is no significant impact on guilty pleas, which is also an expected effect of having better evidence? So interviews were also conducted with 10 Crown prosecutors from the provincial court and 9 defense lawyers. The results from these interviews are preliminary, so they will not be discussed in a detailed way, but they sure can help us identify possible explanations for the statistical results. So the preliminary results from the interviews indicate that the footage can be useful for prosecution in some instances, but not in all cases. Obviously, the footage can be useful for prosecution when a crime is recorded. And it was especially the case when suspects were recorded violating their conditions of release. So an example of that is in domestic violence cases, when the accused is recorded being in contact with the victim, although this is forbidden by their conditions of release. Prosecutors and lawyers also believe that although a crime was not recorded, the footage could be useful to show contextual circumstances after a crime. For example, a prosecutor explained that in one case, the footage showed a suspect running away from the police officers, and that this type of post-offense behavior showed, according to her, a guilty conscience. So in this specific case, the suspect pleaded guilty. In many cases, however, recordings seems to be no help. For example, the Crown prosecutors mentioned that the footage was often not useful because the police was called much later after a crime, meaning that the footage would show the arrest of a suspect, but did not bring any additional valuable information. Another example of the limitations of the footage is when the victims do not collaborate with the prosecutor. For example, a prosecutor said that in one case, although a suspect was recorded confessing to domestic violence, it was acquitted because the victim would not testify. Also, many prosecutors indicated that the recording is often not useful because it is redundant with the police officer's account. So a majority of the prosecutors actually said that they didn't really have time to watch the videos, and most of the time they would just rely on the officer's account. Now, can the body cam recordings help clear defendants? So most prosecutors and lawyers, they believed that it could be used to exonerate defendants in charter motions, for example. This is when a defendant's rights are not respected. But in the preliminary sample, no one could recall actually a case where this happened. On the contrary, several prosecutors and lawyers indicated that the footage helped prevent that the defense file a charter motion because the footage clearly showed that the defendant's rights were not breached. So our quantitative results agree with White and colleagues who also found no significant effect on guilty pleas for drug and alcohol cases, but a shorter processing times when there was a camera and they suggested a really interesting hypothesis for such results, which is that evidence from the body cameras, they can either implicate some defendants, but sometimes also exonerate others. So actually in our study, it seems that the footage is rarely used to exonerate the defendant, but mostly that it can be used to clarify facts, whether it is to implicate the defendant or to prevent additional legal procedures from happening, such as charter motions. So what was heard fairly often is that there are less debates between the prosecutor and the lawyer, and this could help explain why it takes less time to process cases. So in conclusion, the quantitative results from this research indicate that the body cameras had no effect on guilty pleas, but were associated with shorter processing time. This could be explained by the fact that the footage is not always used to implicate defendants, but mostly that it helped clarify facts, which could mean less debates and also fewer appearances in court. Of course, this study has several limitations. Most importantly, it was impossible to know whether or how the footage was used in every single case that was studied. Also, the research is still ongoing and there are still interviews to be conducted. But these results really call for further investigation of how body cam footage is really used in legal proceedings. So that's all for me. So thank you for listening, and I'll be glad to answer any question that you may have.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I appreciate it. It was well done. Okay, so we have a few minutes here if we'd like to hold a Q&A. There is one up here from Frank that I'll read. I think this is directed at Martin. Did these agencies have specific policy regarding when the camera was to be activated? And the second part of the question is, were officers in these agencies permitted to view the recording prior to writing reports, or were they not?
Thank you for the question, Frank. At both agencies, officers had to record all interactions with a citizen, whether it was self-initiated, dispatched, no matter what. The only difference is in Sunnyvale, they could not record in hospitals, but the state law didn't really say whether they could or not. The police chief just said, you know what, we're not gonna try to open up that can of worms. And in Pennybridge, they needed to start, like if they were dispatched to a call, they needed to start the video the second they were dispatched. So oftentimes you'll get like 10 minutes of just steering wheel. Regarding the report writing, neither agency had formal protocols about whether you should or can watch footage while you're writing a report. In fact, both chiefs actually said that it was something they purposely did not try to address with policy, and they just sort of wanted to see how things panned out. But at Pennybridge, no one, or very few times did they want to write a report and actually view the footage because it was so cumbersome on the back end. But at Sunnyvale, as both presentations have shown, it was a more common practice.
And Frank thanks you for that explanation. Are there any other questions from the audience that we have here? Any questions that the panelists have for one another? Anybody?
I actually have a question for Brigitte. Is that how you say it? So did defense attorneys ever change their approach when they had body camera footage? Like change their strategies, for instance? Because I would imagine, I'm not a courts person, but I would imagine that I would maybe decide to go more after procedural law than substantial law when I'm mounting my defense, because there might be video of an officer not following procedure and maybe try to exploit that with the footage. Did you see any differences in that?
That's a good question. Unfortunately, both the prosecutors and the defense lawyers that I met for the interviews, usually they only worked on one or two cases where there was camera footage and they could not really tell me if their strategy changed because of the footage, because they were not really used to using this type of video evidence. But a question I asked all of those lawyers and prosecutors was, is there any difference between the body camera footage and any other video evidence? And for them, it was the same thing. They were working with that evidence the same way as they would work with any cell phone footage or really. So I didn't get the chance to hear them talk to me about any difference in regards of their strategy.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Brigitte. Frank has another question here. I think this is for Brigitte as well. In the courts, were there any issues that arose if there was not a recording available? And he gives an example here, the CSI effect where a recording is expected.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to give the same answer. The fact that the prosecutors and the lawyers, they really didn't really get the chance to work with this type of footage on a long period. Actually, some of the people that I contacted at the court that I didn't end up meeting, they did not even remember that there was a pilot with body-worn cameras. So, I mean, most of my interviewees, they were really optimistic about the use of the body-worn cameras by the police officers and everything, but there was no big expectation.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I don't see any other questions in the Q&A box. So I'll just say, thank you to the presenters. Wait a minute, hold on. Another one has come up here. What is this? Oh, Frank is thanking you for your answer. Okay. So I'd like to thank all the presenters for their time and bringing their expertise to this conference. As you all know, we're an upstart here, and it's been really humbling to see, how we've had experts from around the world come and join us and present some of their work here these last few days. Thank you to our attendees as well. If you are interested in body-worn cameras, I have good news because the next panel on this stream is also dealing with body-worn cameras. So if you are interested, we'll be back in about 20 minutes or so. In the meantime, I have to end this feed, and I'll just also say the video from this should be up on our YouTube page, I think sometime by the end of the year, but you never know with these times, so who knows? But we will be posting this publicly for everyone to watch. So I hope everybody stays as healthy as they can in these trying times. Hope everyone has enjoyed CrimCon. And I just say, once again, to our panelists and our attendees, thank you for coming. So have a good one.
Thank you.
See ya.
Thank you.